You may have heard, Nico talked about it in the news, was in the paper recently and some other sources as well. The city of Battle Creek looking for residents to step up as volunteers and serve on a number of different boards, help things move along. And so we thought we might talk with the city manager about that and figure out what might be the best way to approach thinking about that. There's probably some folks out there thinking, maybe I could do that. So Rebecca Fleury's back with us this half hour to talk about that. Good morning.
Good morning, Richard.
Thank you for coming today.
Thanks for having me back.
This is not something that's unusual. These boards have terms, folks cycle in, cycle out, and that's by design.
Yes.
And so these vacancies are nothing unusual. They're just there right now.
No, exactly right, Richard. And it's really important to the City Commission and to the administration that we get people, our residents, involved in government. And this is one of the great ways to kind of dip your toes into that. Mm-hmm. We have a variety of boards and commissions. Right now we have some very specific ones we're looking for, but it's a great way for people to better understand their government, to better understand kind of the codes and ordinances and rules that are in place, and help people through that process. And the best way to do that is through these boards and commissions.
Mm-hmm. You made an interesting point. Get to know government better, get to know how this works. Should a person be in the frame of mind that they want to run for office, and this is a way to get their feet wet?
Oh, not necessarily.
Okay.
I mean, of course, some people use it as that, as to learn more, but not necessarily. This is just a way for somebody to give back that has some time. We have a lot of newly retired, we have a lot of new baby boomers that have retired. We have millennials and young people who just want to get involved in government. This is a great way to do it. And you can kind of pick the boards and commissions that meet, kind of what your interest area is, or, really what your focus is, or your desires in the community. And so really we have such a variety. It's a great way for people to get involved.
And I presume that sometimes folks have expertise in various areas, and it might lend itself well to bring that expertise to a panel like that.
Yes, very much so. For boards and commissions such as the Planning Commission, it's great to have some information, some background in land use and planning and those types of things, but it's not a requirement. That's what's great about it. We just want to get our residents involved, and there's a lot of people that will stand beside you and help you be successful as a board or commission member. Make sure that you have the materials to help you be successful. And, not all of them have regular monthly meetings. Some only meet as needed or as something comes before them. So really it's, how much time do you have to give and what are your areas of interest, and try to find one of these boards and commissions that fit.
It's always interesting because when I've been on a board, there's always a discussion that comes up when there's a vacancy, gee, we really could use a lawyer, or we really could use a doctor, but it doesn't have to be someone of that professional stature. Maybe you have background in, land use or something that might be helpful.
Exactly. And some people we have retired teachers are a great resource to go after too, because they have a wonderful background in the community and working with people, and they don't mind homework, and they understand and they understand the importance of kind of being a contributing member to a board and commission, and that's really it. You have to make sure that you have the time to be a contributing member, because there's very important things that come before these boards and commissions that take thought and a little bit of homework, and some time to kind of think about, or noodle upon it, and to help as a consensus come with a decision moving forward.
And this is why we're talking about this today, because if you have been intrigued by the idea of volunteering in this capacity, Rebecca can help us think about how we should approach it in our own minds and decide whether or not it's a good fit. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment. We'll also talk about the openings that are actually out there, and that'll help you decide too. That's coming up on WBCK. We're here with the Battle Creek City Manager, Rebecca Fleury, talking about volunteer opportunities on various boards in the city of Battle Creek. So which panels are we talking about here, Rebecca?
Right now, we currently have vacancies, and we're seeking board members for the Planning Commission, the Zoning Board of Appeals, the Historic District Commission, and the Board of Appeals.
All right, so let's just do a little brief summary on each one of those of what they do. Planning Commission.
So the Planning Commission takes a look at future growth of the community, and they look at specific development practices, special use permits, the zoning ordinance, and amendments, and property zoning requests, just as a few. That is probably one that there's probably a bit of homework, because you do want to make sure that those board members have some understanding and knowledge of the city's codes, zoning ordinances. Right now, the master plan is under review for a complete amendment, and so the Planning Commission is actively involved in that. They also are involved in the city's capital improvement program, so they review that and make a recommendation to the city commission. So there's a lot of information that goes through the Planning Commission first prior to it coming to city commission. And we had a representative of that last night. The urban ag, the farming and the community gardens ordinance came forward, and that was a lot of work with Christine Zuziga and the planning department and the Planning Commission putting that together and then getting it to a point where it can be an introduction of an ordinance to the city commission.
That's big work, and somebody involved in that, if they don't have a notion for what zoning is about and that sort of thing, or how these precedents have been reached, codes and things like that, there's some work there.
There is, but it doesn't mean that you have to have a background in that.
Okay.
Really, you just need to be a city resident and have some interest in that particular area. And then we have staff that can help kind of bring you up to speed. But there is some expectation, this particularly with the Planning Commission, there's a lot of material that you have to kind of go over before their monthly meetings. And usually they do stick to a monthly meeting schedule because a lot of information goes in front of them.
Right. All right, Planning Commission. What's the next one?
The Zoning Board of Appeals.
Yes.
That is a board that has the authority to waive zoning ordinance requirements when an ordinance or conditions or requirements create a hardship or difficulty for property owners. That one has a very specific legal set of criteria that you have to go through. There's a series of questions that the Zoning Board of Appeals has to go through, and in response to somebody's concern, and to determine whether or not they can waive those particular requirements. So that one, they have some a strict guide and parameters to go through. However, there is staff to guide, and we hope that people will join that board as well. That's
a pretty big responsibility, too. I mean, you're talking about sort of, as a panel, adjudicating various decisions.
Yes, and when you talk about waiving, we have ordinances and codes and things in place for specific reasons, but there are, that not everything fits into a cookie cutter ordinance, and so that's why we have the Zoning Board of Appeals and the Board of Appeals, which we'll probably talk about in a little bit, to look at some of those very unique cases, and if there is the ability and the authority to waive, then that's what that board kind of deliberates on and makes that decision.
City Manager Rebecca Fleury is here. We're talking about the vacancies on various boards in the city where you could volunteer and be a part of that action. We'll talk about the other panels that are looking for volunteers right now. That's coming up in just a moment. With City Manager Rebecca Fleury talking about various panels, boards at the city level where volunteers are needed. A couple of other panels that you referred to. What are they?
The Historic District Commission and the Board of Appeals. So the Historic District Commission, their main purpose is to review applications and plans for construction and alteration, repair, moving, demolition properties within our historic districts, of which we have 5 historic districts in the city. And so that group takes a look at properties and changes to those properties within those districts.
You can see how folks would be interested in that, particularly if you're preservation-minded and that sort of thing. So that's interesting. And the last body?
The Board of Appeals, they hear and decide on appeals concerning the application or the interpretation of provisions and standards of our International Property Maintenance Code and our minimum maintenance requirements for existing buildings. So that has a lot to do with inspections and how, and code. Similar to the Zoning Board of Appeals, they kind of have to look at somebody who's asking for another set of eyes to take a look at a determination that the city may have made and make sure that it does fall in lines with that International Property Maintenance Code and then with our minimum maintenance requirements.
All right. So we've talked about how some of these panels may suggest that someone with certain backgrounds might lend themselves well, but that we don't necessarily need to have those backgrounds to volunteer. Are there requirements, though?
There are. The minimum and most basic requirement is that you have to be a resident of the city of Battle Creek.
That makes sense.
And then each board and commission they may have some criteria that's either set forth in the law itself. So the Planning and Zoning Enabling Act has some requirements of who, kind of sectors of your community that they're looking for on, for example, the Planning Commission, so like an agriculture background, natural resources, and energy, education, recreation, or public health. Those are some very specific things. So if you do find a board or commission that you're interested in, I would encourage you to reach out to the city, to the planning department or to the city clerk's office, and they can give you some more specific requirements that individual boards and commissions may have to make sure that you meet those needs. Because as vacancies occur, it may be in a specific segment or sector, and we'll want to make sure that we abide by that.
Okay, fair enough. Are these specific terms that take place, or do you volunteer and you're there as long as you want to be? How does this work?
Yeah, it could be specific to the board or commission, so you'll want to check each one of them. There are terms on some of them, and some of them we'd love to have you for as long as you're willing and have the time to do that.
Mm-hmm. These are always interesting things when you're looking for volunteers. Having served on a couple of volunteer boards at various times, we didn't have term limits, but after a while you started to say maybe we need to institute them and try and cycle in new blood. And
it's a discussion that we have a lot. I mean, we are so grateful for the volunteers and the members of the boards and commissions that the city has. But you're right, there's always opportunities for new eyes to come in and take a look at it. And so we kind of look at all the boards and commissions and determine that.
Mm-hmm. Have we encountered folks ever who come with specific agendas in mind?
I think yes. Yeah. I will tell you an experience I had, not in this particular community, but sometimes some of our most outspoken critics are a great voice to put on a board or commission because they have a really unique perspective. Mm-hmm. And so in another community, we invited probably one of the community's most outspoken against the planning commission. Some things had happened in their neighborhood and in their area that they weren't so happy with. However, that we were following the rules and regulations in place. And then we put that specific individual on the planning commission, and kind of the homework and the education you get as a member, and then having to deliberate with your fellow commissioners on these types of activities, I think really brought a new perspective to that particular person. So sometimes that's a great opportunity for even our critics to get them involved, so they understand from the city's perspective kind of what staff has to do to prepare something to get in front of these boards and commissions, and then how having to come to a consensus with your fellow board and commissioner members it is not always as easy as you think, and it does bring a new perspective.
Mm-hmm. Talk about walking a mile in the other person's shoes. I guess that gives a good perspective. That's an interesting point, though, because if someone is impassioned enough to be in touch with you on a regular basis about various things, that means that they're probably detail-oriented and they look into things and they're concerned.
Yep, and those are some of the very criteria that we look for in boards and commissioners. Yeah. A lot of times we have to remind boards and commissions that they have a parameter in which they can work at. They certainly don't have the level of authority that a city commissioner has. However, someone like a planning commission member, as I described to you, has some very specific duties and expectations and requirements of that member, and it's really important for the success of the city that we have successful boards and commissions.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, it is interesting, and everybody brings a certain perspective from their experiences to that, and works with others as well, and so sometimes these things meld together decently, and you have a fair representation. That would be the goal, right?
Yes, it is. And, oftentimes we look for very specific segments of the population, like I talked about, like lawyers or doctors and things like that. But the area that we struggle with sometimes is just to get our residents involved. And many, if not all of our boards and commissions have a requirement that we have a certain number of residents. Doesn't mean that you have to be a doctor or lawyer. You just have to be a resident of the city of Battle Creek. Mm-hmm. And we need to get more of those people involved. All
right, so let's repeat one more time. If somebody's listening and they want to look into this further, they have questions, they want to hurry up and volunteer? How do they do it?
Yep, the 4 that we talked about, Richard, they have a deadline. We'd like to get those applications in by Friday, January the 13th.
Okay.
All you need to go is to the city's website, and you can find the application there. It's a very simple form. It's a PDF form. You can fill it out. You can call the clerk's office or the city manager's office. We can point you in the right direction if you don't have web access or something of that nature. But we really want to get people involved.
All right, so a week from Friday is the deadline for those applications, so now would be the time to ask those questions and express interest by way of the Battle Creek website, city website, and go from there.
That's correct.
All right, we'll stay in touch. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciate it.
City Manager Rebecca Fleury on WBCK.